Hello everyone, welcome back to another game overview. This time we have Soldiers of the Sun. This is from H&S Games. Jason Cruz over there sent me a copy. He asked me if I'd like to, kind of run through this, and I said yeah. And in fact, this is the second video I'm making. The first one I made, put it all together, uploaded it, and it turned out that a huge section of the video got corrupted in the process of converting it and uploading it. And I thought, based on what I saw, I'll just go ahead and film another one. So hopefully this turns out fine and you can see all the really cool stuff going on with Soldiers of the Sun. H&S Games, they're also, I'm going to say, they're responsible for Advanced Platoon Leader. They've got the Advanced Platoon Leader game. They also have Platoon Leader, and then that had some mods there. Mods? I want to say DLC. I'm stuck on computer terms, but they had some expansions there as well. And so Soldiers of the Sun is their latest game. It's not out yet. It'll be coming out in December. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Coming in December. And I think it was just going to be a print and play, and it'd be about 15 bucks. But let me tell you, it's actually, I think, really worth the price. That's the first thing I want to do, is take a look at some of the components, and then we'll go through some of the gameplay ideas, take a look at the rules, and you can see for yourself that I think you're going to really enjoy this. The game comes on there's like 5 documents you're going to get in the zip file. At least that's what I had. There was like the rules, there was the scenarios, and I didn't print those out. I kept those on my iPad. The scenarios are 6 scenarios. Then there was a printout for the counter sheets. And then there was a printout for this quick reference. And I really think there was one other thing I had to print out, and I don't remember, or could print out. But this right here is your quick reference sheet. This is one of the printouts that you have. So of course, just like a quick reference, it's got all the modifiers that you need to run the game. And you pretty much can run the game off this one page. So that's very, very useful. It includes some things such as how do you attack, how to check for routing, what happens if you're pinned, broken, eliminated, how do you make your recover checks, some of your modifiers for combat, then if you're able to maneuver or not, range. This mostly is set up for the beginning of the game, where you check to see the distance between the starting opponents, and then if you're in cover. Then there's the bonus activation points roll, which we'll spend some time talking about the activation system. It's great. Then there's what happens if you have units out of command. So in this game, the leaders are very important, and without them it becomes very difficult to activate and get people moving. Force strength, let's see here, your actions that you can do: move, fire, reaction, fire, recover. The weather when you're starting out, and there's even, let's see, might not be on here, but there was a roll you could check to see if it was nighttime. Then there's a star shell availability, of course, if it was night. Here's the events. The events here are defined in the rules, but they're right here to summarize for you. After you've played a while, you got little notes here that reminds you what the event is, but like anything, if you need a further explanation, check the rules. Then you have, the cat is playing with my foot. Then you have the Imperial Japanese Army Artificial Intelligence. So here's how they would operate, and we can actually take more look at that later. But these are the things you get on the quick reference sheet, and that's pretty much what you need to run the game. On the back of your quick reference sheet, so we'll just flip that real fast, is your sequence of play. The very first part is your pregame. This says conduct only once. You can play the scenarios that are included, or this will give you a random startup to your game. And this is fantastic. This is what gives you that unlimited playability, because not only is it going to give you random weather possible, it's also going to give you random forces that you play with, and then the random distance, if they start in cover or not. This truly gives you a lot of playability in this package. And then finally, when the game has started. It talks about how to place your initiative chits, so on and so forth. So that's probably what we'll do, is walk through the pre-game, the in-game sequence, and give you an idea of how this all fits together. So that is your first player aid that you can print out. This is your activation tracker. It also has your victory points, has your turn track. This is where you could track the weather condition if it's nighttime, and then finally the US cost of activation. And these are things that we'll cover in detail, but a lot of this is determined at the start of the game, and then some of your activation points, victory points, those will be determined as you play the game. And then the activation track, that's used for determining how many action points it costs for you to activate your troops based on how many activation points you have. It's a very simple system. I believe that when I explain it, hopefully I do it justice, because I really, really like it. Now, as far as printing, the first sheet we looked at, that all these came on PDF. So I just printed out the first sheet double-sided. Then the other PDF I opened was about 4 pages long, and this is one of the pages. This was your tracker. What I did for the tracker, because it was slightly smaller and I'm going to use that to hold pieces, instead of leaving it on cardboard, I actually went ahead and glued it to the thickest watercolor paper I could get. That's pretty thick. I mean, it's still flexible, but it does have a little bit of extra rigidity to it, since this is where I put a lot of trackers. So that was one of the items that you print. You also have 2 pages of counters. So let's take a look at some counters. I've laid the tiles out. They're not called counters in the game. They have counters, but specifically for your units, they're called tiles. So I've got a couple stacks here. They're big. These are about 1.5 inches, so I wasn't able to lay them all out so you could see, but you're going to have a mixture of your Japanese infantry units. You'll also have some special units like light machine guns, your demo charges, mortar, 50mm mortar, MMG, and then the United States Marines, they have similar. They also have their infantry, they also have special weapon teams, and all of the infantry, they have different values, so no 2 teams are alike. And that's how this game is played out. It's squad level, but your squad is comprised of 3 teams, and then you're going to have, for example, the chance to roll for and get maybe an LMG team, which would replace one of your starting teams. Because your teams, your squads, you'll start with three teams, for example, and then you randomly also draw for, say, your squad leader, and you could stack him with somebody at the start of a game. Then you make another roll, and that would say, oh, I'm able to get and draw randomly for a support item my LMG, and that would replace one of your starting teams. So a lot of the game can actually just be randomly determined versus, the scenario, which tells you exactly what you get. That's why I'm saying there's a lot of replayability here, even with the tiles that you have. You have enough tiles to create a platoon. So 3 squads with 3 teams each, a squad leader per squad, and then the possibility to swap out with some special equipment. Most of the time what I did for playtesting and kind of getting understanding for the game, which kind of shortened, a lot of my playability, but what I recommend is just start with three teams. Start with 3 teams, get you a squad leader, and then just kind of play. And then later, as you get comfortable, add in some of the equipment. Unless you're brave, just jump right in and get all the extra equipment that you can. And then the Japanese player would do the same thing. When we go through the sequence of play, you'll see exactly at what point you draw your troops. But what I wanted to show you here was how, I think these are gorgeous. How gorgeous are these counters? I also printed these on cardstock and then glued them to the watercolor paper. So again, they have enough rigidity to hold up to me playing. Obviously, I wouldn't give it to my 3-year-old because she could quite easily bend it. But as far as just a print and play game, they hold up really good. And I also sprayed these with a clear matte varnish just to give them a little more rigidity here on the outset. But what do you have on here? Well, first of all, you're going to have your infantry picture. This is what I really liked about the tiles. They're big enough that you have a nice picture depicting the unit. Now, I would have liked to have seen maybe some variety, maybe a picture of an actual, maybe someone with a demo charge, or a picture of somebody with a machine gun, maybe a different picture for the sergeant or squad leader. A little variety would have been great, but as far as what you have, it's just very, very clean. I know a lot of people, when they get their counter, there's like the picture takes up most of the counter, and then your lettering and numbering is very, very small. Here, I think he compromised. Jason came up with a fantastic system. Great artwork, and then you have the lettering right on top, and it's big, bold. You can read this from across the table. Everything fits nice, and then you have your nationality symbol. And the Japanese counters are set up exactly the same way. They have their nationality symbol, they got their picture of a soldier, and let's look at the numbers real quick. So this first one is your firepower strength, this second one is your range, then you have your maneuver number, and then you have your morale. Alright, so the maneuver number is important because you're going to roll a dice 6, add this number, and if it's 5 or higher, they actually get to move. And we'll talk about some of the abstractness that the game portrays, but that is an important factor. Then you also have this number, which is a unit identifier. And since there's I believe there's 18 total, 19 I think is what we got maximum each side, they each have an individual number just to help keep track of who's being activated. And you'll see how that all works out. But what I wanted to show you was just how great the tiles look. I almost thought about doing like a Tom Vassell Dice Tower slow motion drop of everything, except I don't know if I could get the slow motion part to work, so we'll just look at the cutout pieces. This was the other PDF form that I got. There were a lot of little extra counters that you can use here. So I took my standard GMT counter tray, cut everything out, and filled it up. And again, I did the same thing. These are all printed on the watercolor paper, which just gives them a little extra rigidity over cardstock. And you have your fired, moved, your open cover, no cover, pinned, broken. There's some star shells and various counters that we're going to use to set up not only the game board, but to help us track activations and who's done what. So there you go. That's another of the page that you get. So that's your components, right? We got your player aid chart. You have your unit activation cost chart. You have all the tiles that you get. And then you have all these counters. It seems, I don't know if that seems like a lot or not. It was a good amount. I think that for the game that you have, that's actually exactly what's needed to make this work. Well, since we've talked about the game, let's go ahead and take a look at the rules on how to play the game. So here are the rules. I've got them on the old iPad. This is the cover of the rule book. The rule book has a total of 17 pages, and it's broken down into 27 sections, and then subsections accordingly. And it's laid out very well. It's 17 pages, but the first couple pages are like the cover page, title. What, I already forgot what that was called, right? Your table of contents. It's been a day. And with that in mind, the rules read really well, and it works. It's very tight. I actually was able to answer all of my own questions by rereading sections of the rules that I wasn't sure about, and that's actually very cool. I know sometimes I have a tendency to want to just go straight to Board Game Geek in the forums and see what questions people have, and I won't say that that might not happen, but the way that I read and interpreted the rules, I just enjoyed the game for what I got out of it. And so that's your 17 pages of rules. So it reads really well. I think you'll enjoy it. So you have an introduction, talks about the components that we looked at. Then you get to talk about team composition. Then it has mention of the scenarios. And then for the people who like to create their own stuff, it talks a little bit about rolling for your weather. Tells you a little bit about what squad leaders do, what bonuses they give them when they're attached or not attached, which comes down into your command, because there's penalties if you have soldiers that are not in command. The stacking, there's like unlimited stacking. Even though there's unlimited stacking, you still only attack individual units or teams within the stack. And you don't even attack like the leader specifically, like your squad leader. You have to go through all of the teams protecting him first. Then There it is, leaders and stacking, talks about force strength when you start your game. Tile layout, so we'll take a look at the map board and how you lay out your initial tiles, like determining range between them and whatnot. Then it goes into the initiative chit system, how you track turns, the random events, talks about activation points. This is a section I'm going to go through and show you on video how the activation works and how you track who can activate and do what, because I think it's just absolutely brilliant. I love it. Then here's the actions, which there's even a reminder on the player aid chart, so you can move, you can fire, reaction fire, which is like opportunity fire. You can recover or rally, pinned units. Then you have your assault rules. Then there's also your how to use like your different fire support. The special rules for the charge, which is an event. The charge being specifically the bonsai charge. Then it has some explanations of some of the counters, how to mark them if you're spent or fired or pinned, broken, how to deal with wounded folks or wounded leaders, what happens if you're eliminated, how to calculate range, if there's cover or not, line of sight, some informational counters such as how to draw your event, the event explanations here. Then the sequence of play, the pregame. What you need to do to set yourself up. It has 8 steps, and then the in-game sequence reminder, which is also on the player aid. Then it talks about your support weapons, what they do specifically and how you use them, if there's a weapon malfunction, and then also a little Japanese army artificial intelligence, which is very cool. I'll mention that right now because I'll probably forget about it later. What I liked is you roll a dice 6 if you want to use this method, and then it will tell you if they move or kind of what the AI does based on the situation. So let's say I rolled a 1 and it says if you're out of range, move. So in other words, they're going to move so they're in range to shoot stuff. But let's say they don't qualify for out of range. Maybe they're in range. Well, then it says if they're in the open, they'll move. Well, if they're not in the open, they just keep moving down the list of items to do until they hit one they can do. It's very simple. Now the other thing you can do is, that's if you start at the top, or if you roll, like if I rolled a 1, because you can either start at the top and work your way down, or roll a die 6, and then I rolled a 6, so I could start at 6. A leader may move in order to bring one or more out of command teams back in command. And it does the same thing. If they can do that, great. If not, I would cycle around to step 1. The reason I like the die roll method, it gives a little bit of randomness and uniqueness to each team that you're going to control for the Japanese. So they're not always running the same robotic interface. They'll start at maybe 3 or 4 and work their way down. I just kind of liked it. I thought that was a nice touch. I thought I'd mention it now. Then you start getting into the night rules, star shell for nighttime, your victory point trackers, victory conditions, and then finally we got optional rules. So you have smoke, facing. Normally the game doesn't worry about facing, but it does have optional facing rules. Blind IJA activation, playing as them. So this is a solitaire game, but there's a blurb on here on what it would take to make the game a 2-player game if you wanted. So you'd have an opponent be the Marines and another opponent be the American players. So again, obviously just racing through the rules here to give you an idea that it's not super thick. The stuff in here actually is right on point for what's needed to run the game. And that's what we'll look at as we go through the different setup steps, which is what we can look at next. When you get the game and you print out your sequence of play, what you would do is you would start right here at the pre-game, and you just start at number 1. So the first thing that it would have us do is determine the number of turns, which is going to be a roll of a die 6. Nice. I have my dice tower next to me, but I didn't think you'd want to switch back and forth to the dice tower in here. But for example, I rolled a 6, so that tells me the game would have 7 turns. So this is item number 1 that we determined was how many turns. And I put the T for turns right there. And as we determine some other items, this game chart is going to fill up even more. So let's see what's next. Second thing we need to check for is determine if day or night. I'm going to use the dice tower and I'll just bring the dice roll over. I rolled a 5 and it says that's going to be daytime. On the chart, I would just leave the night spot blank because it's not actually night. If it was nighttime, he has included a handy dandy little N for nighttime, but since I rolled, a 5 for daytime, I'll just leave that blank. For me, I might make something that's got a D so I remember, oh, it's daytime, but for now, we'll leave it blank. Next, we determine the weather. Is it clear or is it rainy? So I'll roll a die for that. I didn't use the dice tower, but I rolled a 1. And it says that the weather for this mission will be clear. I've gone ahead and put the weather marker in the clear. So now I know it's 7 turns, we have clear weather, and it's during the day. So we look there, it says roll for victory conditions. Those I've got here in the rule book. So just one thing to point out, might be a typo that we can get fixed later. I say we, I don't actually do this, but maybe the team can fix later for the release, would be the chart tells me the victory conditions are at section 27.1. In the rules it's 26.1. So not a big deal. But what you would do is roll die 6, and then you have 6 potential victory conditions that you can play for. Now that you've got your turn track, weather, daytime, nighttime, you've got some victory conditions, the big thing now is determining your force strength and what you might be fighting on against the enemy. That's what I do. I like to kind of make it random for both sides. Let's see, so like I rolled a 1, so I would say I'm going to be playing with a 1 is going to be 3 teams and 1 squad leader. And if I was, really making up my own scenario, then I could roll to see maybe what the Japanese would have. And it's possible you might roll that you're facing an entire platoon of Japanese and you've only got your 1 squad. So you might want to give yourself that mortar or something to give you some extra oomph and firepower, or just re-roll. But that's the beauty of it, because it's an open-ended scenario creation system. If you don't like what you rolled, you can kind of cheat. I do. Alright, but that would be the next thing. So I'm going to say that for the sake of looking at stuff, we're just going to go with 1 squad, 3 teams, a team leader. Alright, so I've gathered up my 9 marine tiles, and I'm going to throw them into a bag. Since the tiles are kind of big, I didn't want to just stick things in a cup. I'm going to try and shake this up a bit. They probably don't shake very good either, but we'll just pretend I'm grabbing randomly here. So I would grab this guy first at random. Ooh, his firepower is not very good. Then I grab this guy. He's got a little bit better. See, he's got 1 firepower but 5 range. So, I could pretend that's maybe like a sniper squad. They got good range. And then I have pretty decent firepower, mediocre range. That's probably about your average. 3 is probably your average number. And then I grab 1 more. So their firepower is not very good, a little bit better range, movement's okay, and they have a little bit higher morale. So you're going to get different squads. And once you've got your initial squad set up, then you're going to draw for your squad leader. Squad leader is determined the same way. You just take your squad leaders, stick them into your randomizer device, shake it up a bit, and pull out 1 squad leader. And we got a 2, 3. For the sake of not boring you, I've gone ahead and drawn out the Japanese opponents that they would face. And you can see there, they've got pretty bad firepower, 4 range, a little bit above average, I'd say. And then their morale, varying amounts of averageness. The leader, and I think I forgot to mention this, so the leader has 2 values. They just have their command range, radius, and then they have their own morale. But those would be the 2 squads that I would have facing each other. The next thing that we would be checking for is laying out the squad. So you lay them out randomly across in a row, and you're going to place them on the board. And then I'm just going to show you these next steps here real quick. You would then conduct a range check and cover roll for each side's team tile, and then we would also conduct a line of sight roll. So what I'm going to do now is lay out the map board, put the tiles down, and then we'll discuss those aspects. And welcome to the map board. It looks like a table. Well, it is. That's actually something very unique about the game. There is no map. So being a solitaire game, what he's done is he's gone and he's using like a grid system. So I'm going to move the camera around. So the grid system actually has 9 grid markers along the top, and then it's got 7 along the side. The 7 here on the side indicate a range value, so like range 3, range 2, range 1. Yes, it's an abstract arbitrary value. Now it does say each point of movement, if you gridded it out, is about 40 yards, so you could say from range 3 to range 2 is about 40 yards if you're playing that way. And then the 0 point is that the median, the equator, splitting it. So that's the 0, and then 1 away, 1 range band away, 2 range bands away from 0. So if I had somebody at the 0 range band and I had an enemy here, we can see that that would be on the 1 range band. Anyway, we'll talk about how to calculate distances. Now the thing along the top is you're actually going to have this split up, more defined, into 3 columns. So you actually have a center channel, right channel, and then a left channel, or wing in this case. So there's your center wing, left wing, right wing. Yes, my first thought was, oh, it's going to be like Memoir 44, or one of those commands and color games where different things I activate will determine in which wing things move. But it's not that way. When you have your one squad game is going to start with everybody in the center wing. If you had 2 squads, one would be in the center. You randomly determine if the other one is left or right. And if you had a full squad of 9 tiles, then it would be 1 squad per wing. So in this beginning game, you start out with both forces in the center wing. Now, when you have your grid laid out, it said one of the things you check for is a range roll to see how far apart everybody is. And here it is. There's the range chart right here. So what you would do is I would look at I would say for me, I'm going to start with this team and this team, and I would roll to see what their distance is. So I check the old dice tower. Dice tower gives me a 3. Just trust me. So I'd look at that first set of teams, and it tells me that the 3 apart, like they're going to be on the 3 range. Okay, so I would have this guy here on the 3, and then I could roll, and this guy might be, I say this guy, down here on the 3. So I just randomly check to see what range band they're at, and I would make my rolls, and so that might mean I might end up with somebody up here. Possibly, what's the closest range I could get? I might get someone on the 1. Nobody starts on the 0. So I might have it, my initial ranges set up like that. And I would also roll for the Japanese player as well, because again, that random setup, it measures, like the scouting, they're looking for each other. So that's what I do, is I like to randomly determine what range band everybody starts at. Now, just to talk about that abstract map for a moment. Since there's no map, you could play on a grid of your own making if you wanted. You could randomly ahead of time determine what all the different terrain in each map would be, because one comment I've had from friends is, but how do I know where I want to move? So I play it like Battleship, right? I've got this area here in the center wing, and I'm going to move it to range 1, and you just cross-reference. But I don't know what the terrain is. The way the game works is when you move to a location, you then roll to see what cover you found. And after talking with my friends, we have our own narrative understanding that we're in the jungles of the Pacific fighting, and there's not very good visibility. So I think what is going to be over somewhere is more jungle, but I don't know how much cover it's going to provide until I get there, because I can't see that far. And that's narratively how I look at it. So if you were playing this for yourself, you could lay it down on green felt, green map, whatever terrain you want, but you're just mostly concerned with your grid layout, your range bands, and then what you roll for the cover when you move there. That's why, for those who are clever, I like to tinker with games. You could, the cover is generic, it just says like partial cover, no cover, cover. But you could thematically make that for any setting that you want. And so for me, jungle-wise, this works out well. I can't see where I'm going, and I won't know what I have until I actually get there. Alright, so anyway, that's the next thing you do is you roll for cover. That's what I'm getting at with the map. And the map has the handy dandy chart then actually talks about cover. You roll a die 6, boom. You're going to check that for each tile and see if they're in cover or not. What I've done then is I've gone ahead and I rolled to see what people had based on my chart. So this unit is in the open as indicated by their marker. This one's partial. So to indicate partial, you just put the marker on its side. And then this guy, he's in the open. So I got 2 in the open, 1 in partial cover. Then the Japanese player, he's got 1 unit in partial cover, 1 in the open, and then another 1 in partial cover. So they're in much better defended areas. Now the next thing we would check for after we got our range bands, we've got the cover that they're in, we're going to check for line of sight. Boy, that one is a little more complicated to explain. You have your left wing, center wing, and right wing, and you've got a kind of a visible gap. Should be a little bit bigger to help you identify. And another abstracted item is this concept of line of sight between the wings. So for instance, I would roll on my chart. Let me show you the chart real fast. And I've got line of sight. I roll a die 6, and it's going to tell me, I don't know if I showed you that, yeah. It's going to tell me if I have line of sight, no line of sight, or like obscured line of sight between the wings. So what you do is you would find the 0 range band, mark across until you hit the intersection of your first wing, and based on your die 6 roll, you might get that there's line of sight. And since there's only two of these you have to do, you might find out that this one has like obscured. Let's see what they call that, partial line of sight or obscured line of sight. This says partial line of sight. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is between the wings of our terrain, there might be a terrain that's so thick with vegetation that you just can't see through it from this area to this area. So within your wing, each section that people move to, they're going to find their own individual cover. However, if I was going to shoot from the right wing to the center wing, I might not be able to because there's no line of sight. Or there's going to be a die roll penalty because there's partial cover. Or if I was going to shoot from the middle to the left, there'd be no penalty for shooting because it's open terrain. So the only thing I got to worry about is the terrain that each tile is in. And that's pretty much it for that. And that's your setup. So according to this, we have 7 turns in clear weather in the daytime. We've got 1 squad each. We've determined their cover. We've determined the ranges that they're going to be on the board. And then we also have that there's line of sight between the wings. So when you actually roll this out, it sets up a lot quicker than what I've taken to explain. But now we're actually going to go ahead and walk through the phases of the game. Once we're ready to start our game and we have our tiles and everything set up, we have to set up our draw bag or draw cup. What I have here is 1 Japanese activation marker for each tile. Your squad leaders do not get an activation marker. They can activate when a tile within command range of them is activated, and then they could move along with troops and things like that. Then, so I've got 3 for the Japanese, 3 for the American player. Then I add in the 3 randomly in turn. So it's possible that as you're playing, if you draw 3 of these, your turn might end prematurely. Then you have an event marker, which we talked about. The way the event marker works is if I drew the event marker, I would then draw another activation chit to see which side is affected by the event. Alright, so that's going to be our random cup pile. I'll have to see if I have a cup, because I'm not going to use my Seagram's bag, but I need the Seagram's bag for something else. I'll show you that here in a second. Next thing we do is we determine how many activation points we have for starting the game. You get 1 activation point for each tile, since both have 3 tiles. I'll put them on the 3. Then you roll 1 die 6 for each tile that you have. And then on every 4, 5, or 6, you get to add a bonus activation point. So I'm going to roll for the Japanese first. Oh my goodness. Alright, there you go. They got lucky, unlucky number, whatever you want to call that. But they're going to get themselves 6 bonus points. Then we'll roll for the American player. And they didn't do quite as well. So they're going to get themselves 2 bonus activation points. And this is kind of what drives the heart of the game. So we're going to take a look at how we use that. That's the next thing we randomly determine, is the initiative cost for our troops to spend our activation points on. Or I should say the activation cost. So what you do is you have these markers, one that corresponds for each number that's on your tile. So for example, I've got an American unit here, number 2. So what I would do is I make sure I have a 2, a 6, and a 7. That's who I have for my American side. And I did the same thing for the Japanese here. And you would stick that in your randomizer as well. You could stick that in your Seagram bag or cup or whatever you have. Now this step you pretty much only have to do once. But I'm going to go ahead, just for sake of time, I'm going to pretend I've randomly deposited all these things and I draw them. So I'm going to put a 2 in that spot, a 6 in this spot, and then a 3 in that spot. Then for the American player, 2 in the first spot, 6 in the second spot, 7 here. Jason, if you could please, anybody could do this themselves, but if you have a chance, on the 6 and the 9, if you could put the little dash to let me know if it's a 6 or a 9, because if I have my 6 and my 9 tile out, you would, they're the same. So add a little underscore and you'll know what's what. Alright, well there you go. That's, well, I'm looking. I think we're good. Pin, star, shell, the end. Yeah, we're ready to go. We have a game that's running. Okay, so what do we do with all this? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. Well, remember, when we looked at our handy-dandy reference sheet, right? We have our actions. Let's see, where did it tell us here? It says we could do, where were they? I thought they were here. We could fire. Where was my list at? I thought, oh, actions right down here, right? We can move, we can fire, we can do reaction fire, we can do recover, assault, fire support, smoke, or star shells, check for bonsai. Let's look at the basics. Move and fire. Alright, this is the heart of the game. This is where I was getting to. I really wanted to get to this part. We've set everything up. So how do we determine who goes first? Well, that's where I have these activation chits that I've set aside, initiative chits. So I have 1 for each tile. So what I do is, like I said, either I put them over here actually. I was trying to find them. I stuck them in a clear bag because my Seagram bag I like to use for other stuff. So what I would do is I reach in here, randomly pull, and I go, oh look, I drew an end turn. Okay, well that doesn't do much. If I draw 2 more, I could end the turn before we've even done anything. That would be fantastic. Drew the event. Well, look at that. I didn't plan this. Just because I'm using a clear plastic bag doesn't mean I did that on purpose. But now I don't know what event I have. And I don't know who it's going to affect. So that would be the next thing. I draw. And I would draw Americans. Okay, so I'm going to check the random event table. And then I would see what event I end up with. So there's the random event table. I rolled a 2, so it's just the wind. Oh, I should roll 2 dice. A 3. Oh, it says fear. So I'd look at 21. I have to go into the rule book and see exactly what fear does. It says here, for fear, the side with the least amount of teams has 1 team break. That's bad. You can't really do a whole lot when you're broke except to try to rally. Well, luckily starting out it says roll a die, and if both sides have the same amount of teams on you roll a die 6, even as a US player will have a random team break, or odd would be the Japanese army. 2 even. Turns out it's the US player after all. Bad luck. Since I've got all my teams here, I might want to just randomly decide who gets broke. So I could go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I could just roll. Whoops, I rolled a 2. I'm going to flip that real quick. So I'm going to say that this group starts off broken. Well, look, we've already got a story forming, right? I moved these closer just so if I show things, they're next to each other. But let's say they got that way based on, you know, the turns, what I've been doing. I might say that they've moved within range that, yeah, this team actually got scared. And they got scared and broke themselves. Now there you go. That's narrative. Alright. We still haven't gotten anywhere. Okay, now we can get somewhere. So we drew an event, we broke one of our American units, but now it's the American player's turn to decide what to do. Okay, and remember we got several actions. Let's say we wanted to move. Who do I move? Alright, let's talk about the brilliance of the activation system that you have here. You have a certain amount of activation points that we rolled for, and my Japanese player had 6, the American player had 5. To do something, if I want to activate one of these units, I pay the cost that's in the box. So for example, if I wanted to activate Unit 7, it would cost me 3 of my activation points. 1, 2, 3. Leaving me with essentially, 2. 1, 2. Or, bring back to 5, I might activate the number 2 guy that's here in this number 1 box. And that's only 1 activation point. Boop. And they could do whatever, fire, move, and I would just mark them with a fire or a move. And each tile can be activated twice. So yeah, I could do that. I could activate him. Now, here's the important thing. You're going to take that guy you activated, move him to the end, and now slide everybody down. What? So now if I wanted number 2 to act again, I would have to pay 3 more activation points. 1, 2, 3. And I could give him a second action, and let's say fire or move again, and then he would be marked as spent. He's done. You just flip that marker on its side. So I could move, fire, do a combination thereof, and then boom, he's spent. And if he does that second action, it either costs 3, or if I then have, let's say if I just spent the 1 point, I'm at 4, and then I have the number 6 guy go, I do the same thing. They cycle through, and that costs me 1. Now, in between each turn, right, you do one action with a person, you then reach into your draw bag, and you would draw out another activation marker. But what you do is you put this guy back. So you only have to remove an activation marker from the bag if a unit has acted twice. So that means, there's less chances of drawing the same side over and over because he's got someone who's already activated twice. Or if somebody dies. So if I destroy this Japanese player, that can just go away. I would just take that one out because he's only got 2 units now that he plays with. Then on the next turn, I would put all the activation or initiative markers for the spent folks back in, clear all my markers, and we're ready for a new turn. Okay, so why is this cool? Alright, I first saw a system like this in a game called Conan, the board game. It's like a miniatures game. And this is a system that they use to determine who can do what. And I'll tell you why it's brilliant. Because they use a system of like exhaustion in addition to this activation. And that's what this does. This is what the Dungeon Master uses. So essentially, if I've got a guy over here on the 1, they're fresh. They're loaded up. They just put ammo in their guns. They tightened up their bootlaces. They're ready to go. So you activate them. Well, now they're put at the end of the line because they're tired. Or they just fired a bunch of ammo and they're reloading, right? This is where your narrative mind can kick in. Why are they no longer able to activate at a cost of 1? But in the game, you're like, but my goodness, that's my machine gun unit. They have to shoot again. Well, now it's going to cost you those 3 extra activation points to do something with, because maybe he was in the middle of reloading, any number of things that makes them not fully prepared. Now, if they're at the end and you activate them again, they don't move. They just stay in this high cost position. Now, if you had more people, so let's grab some more numbers. I'm grabbing numbers. So let's say I'm playing with my 6 people. I grabbed 7. Let's say I had 6 tiles. The system's the same. I'm going to look at my map. I'm going to decide which unit needs to absolutely do something now. So let's just quickly move you over here to the map. So let's just say I've got this broken pinned unit, and I don't want them to get shot again and then get eliminated. I need them to make a rally roll, and they've got their squad leader with them. So that's my number 7 guy. So let's see where he's at on the track. Well, at the start of the turn, right, we know I have 7 activation points. Let's say I made a couple bonus rolls. So I have 9. 9 points. No, I did that wrong. I got 6 because I got 6 tiles. 6 tiles. Counting is not my strong suit. Then I made some rolls, and let's say I did end up with 9 activation points total. Well, number 7, that's the person I needed to do the rally roll now. So if they're broken, they probably are a little bit exhausted. They're trying to, recuperate. So I would activate them. So I spend my 3 points. So 1, 2, 3. Go from 7 down to 6, and I'm going to move him to the end. And boom, boom, boom. But let's say I fail the rally roll. They're still broken. Oh my goodness. Well, I could activate that unit one more time for a rally roll because it's going to cost 6 points, right? They just exhausted themselves trying to rally themselves. And now they're in more disarray. So it's going to cost that full 6 points. Or I might decide, meh, I didn't really like that guy anyway. Let's activate unit number 2 for 1 point. Well, I'd take that off, but you bring it over here and shift it all down, and there's your activation. Boop. Now remember, in between there's a little bit of a back and forth, because you would do an action, then you would draw a chit, and possibly the American player would go again, or maybe be the Japanese player that would get pulled. So if you didn't quite rally that unit, they might not survive until you could activate them again for that, absolute must rally them. Or what you could do is, let's say it was the number 2 guy and he failed and now he's at the end. Well, let's say he's in a safer position on the map. So you might activate a couple of these other units, and as you see, what you're doing is you're giving these guys on the end a chance to rest and put themselves together again. You're giving them a chance to reload their ammo, catch their breath, get some food, smoke a cigarette, right? So I activate this guy. And again, I'm moving them down the chain. Now, of course, it's, if you're activating just the number 1 guy, and if you started at a high amount, right, you're just 1. But you might get yourself back down to a position where you say, you know what? I'm going to activate 1 more troop. And now this guy here who was broken, it's 3 activation points. You know what? I think I'm going to try and rally him again. And I'm going to spend my 3 points. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to make my rally roll. And of course now that would shift him back. And hopefully he makes the roll, because it's going to be a lot of activation points to fix that guy. But that's why I really like this system. It gives you that fog of war, that I'm trying to send commands out, but are they responding? It's really cool because there's games that try to simulate morale and the psychological effects of war. Why aren't you moving? And they have different rules for that. Usually it's like a die roll, all right? But what you have here, like, here's how I see it, right? Some games, they have a morale system where you make a roll, and depending on what you roll and the morale state of the unit, they might be able to act. Okay, I'm going to try and be vague. I don't want to do a versus or call out games. Then some games you have the unit is either in good order or broken. And if it's broken, then it doesn't really do anything at all because the people are in such a disarray they can't perform. Well, here your people have either pinned or broken, which can affect die roll, but then this system right here gives you a great way to simulate the effect of war. So when I activate somebody, they're tired, and like I said, they got to reload. But as I activate my more fresh troops, the guys who are tired and winded could eventually move down the line. See, I might activate this guy, so these guys get freshened up a little bit, but these guys on the end, they're still top-notch ready to go. And so when I activate that one special bazooka team for that one special attack, it's only going to cost me one activation. But to keep him in the #1 spot, to save, quote-unquote, save him for that special action, I'm going to have to pay a higher cost for everything else. That's what I'm saying. This is such a great system. You have a lot of planning points for your troops. Okay, so let's just flip over to the map, right? So I might activate this guy, and then I draw, and it's a Japanese who's activated. But just because I get to activate a Japanese unit, I don't know which one I want to activate until I look at my activation chart and then have to make those painful decisions. Well, my chart says that this unit is only going to cost 1 point to activate. In this setup, where I've got them right close to each other, shooting and things like that, it's pretty obvious, a given what I would do. But once you have your troops spread out among them, across the map, if you will, then movement is going to become important. So do I shoot? Do I move? Do I move in for an assault? So you're going to have a lot of those decisions to make. That's why I'm thinking you're going to really like the game. If you can get into that activation system, you're going to see that this has a lot of depth. And that also leads to the replayability, because you never know which troops are going to activate. It's like nearly impossible for you to make the determination of, well, based on the units I've drawn and my activation costs, a puzzle. There are some games that you can play and you're given a scenario and it's actually not so much a battle anymore, it's like a puzzle. Well, if I activate these units and do this, and then, oh, I lost the scenario, let me restart it. Because of the random nature on how things are done here, it's hard to come up with that puzzle system. Each scenario replayed is going to be a little bit different, unless you specifically pick exactly the same stuff every time. But if you do a random scenario creation, or just randomly pull your troops, you're going to find a different game each time, because you don't know how they're going to activate or the cost of activation. I know I talked a lot about that, but that really is the heart of the system that drives this game. Now, we didn't cover specifically like move and range and distances, so I'm going to talk about that right now. Those are equally important, but once you get the game and you start playing and you see the rules for yourself, it all kind of fits together. I'm just going to line these up and pretend we've got these guys across from each other. So we talked about your range bands earlier. And the way that you count range or check for distance of command is you're going to count those imaginary grid points. So for example, if I move this over, you can see he's on range band 1, and then this Japanese player across is on range band 2, and they're in the center wing. Now, within the wing, you have columns. So this is a column, this is a column, where my finger is pointing, that's a column. Alright? When I have two units across from each other, they're in the same column. There's no additional range cost. So I just count my range band. Now you count the unit that's involved. So this would be a range band 1, 2, 3, 4. So even though I would count, like this, 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, that's like I'm here, 1, 2, 3, I got to count the range band I'm at. So I'm already at a distance of 4. So I would have to compare that here with my shooting value. He has a distance of 5. So I could shoot. He could shoot back. Now, what if they're, cross? Well, now you would add +1 for being in a different column. They're not in the same column. So I would count out, my 3 or 4, and then add 1. And it's add 1, it doesn't matter what column they're in. So, like if I did this guy again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. But that's range. So it's not difficult. It's easy. And it's also the same thing for determining if units are within command range. So if I had a guy up here and my squad leader is back here off the map, so I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because he's in a different column. Well, my command radius is only 2. Oh, so he's out of range. Oh, this guy's screwed too. He's out of range because I would go 1, 2, 3, 4 for a different column. So for this particular leader, yeah, he's got to be close to everybody. So you're gonna have to determine the best way to plot and move your guys to keep that cohesion so that they're within range of some leader. And then combat's not that difficult. We're gonna roll a die 10. So let me get my die 10 out and we'll take a look at combat real quick. Alright, so there's my die 10. So the way combat works is each side's going to roll a die 10 and they're going to compare the higher number based on some modifiers. And just to grab the handy dandy chart real quick, here's some of the modifiers. And it says D for defender, A for attacker. So example, if I had moved and then I'm shooting, there's a -1 penalty for the attacker. If I'm doing an assault roll in itself gives you a +1. If I'm firing at an adjacent target, I get a +1. If I'm firing into cover, if it's the partial or full cover, I could get a +1 or a +2 bonus. No bonus if it's in the open. If I'm shooting through that partial line of sight that we talked about, like if I'm shooting from the center wing over here to the left wing, and this was on partial, that would give the defender a bonus as well. If I'm stacked with a leader, like this guy might be, then I would get a bonus for that. Now if you're playing with some of the optional rules like flanking fire, or if it's rain or night, those would have some modifiers as well. But I chose daytime and it's no weather. And then yeah, you just roll. Now what Jason recommends in the rules is that if you have 2 10-sided dice, then you just say like this one would be for the American and then this one would be for the Japanese player. Roll them both and then decide who has the higher number. And then if the attacker has the higher number by a margin of 1 through 4, they become pinned. If they're pinned, they become broken. If they're broken, they get eliminated. Now it says if you make your attack roll and your number is 5 higher than the defender, then the defender is eliminated. So it could be deadly based on one really good roll. So combat, easy. Movement, just as easy. You're going to use a die 6 for this one though. What you're going to do is you would take a look at your movement number, for example, and you roll a die 6, boom. And you add your maneuver bonus, and if it's a 5 or greater, then they'll move. This goes hand in hand with the activation system. So the activation system is going to tell you how many activation points, right, it takes to motivate these guys to move. Like how prepared are they to move? But the way I look at it narratively, the die roll tells me how physically able are they to move. If I fail to roll, it could be maybe they were pinned down by fire, or they thought they were pinned down by fire, stray sniper bullet, they don't want to move. So even though you told them to move, they might say nope. Maybe they say the jungle's too thick. We're spending our time chopping down jungle with machetes. Alright, well, that's their story. But once I move them, it just costs them, 1 movement point. You move 1 square. I call them squares. But I could change my range band. I can move towards the enemy. I can move away. I can move diagonal, left, right. I might want to bring them up closer so I could eventually charge. But then, once they move, I'd have to roll the die. I got 2. And I would have to know that they got to the new spot and didn't find cover. So that's what we were talking about earlier with the map setup. I can't look ahead and say, yeah, my troops are moving there. The way it works is, yes, my troops are moving, and if they're in the open, that means they didn't quite make it to cover, or they only found partial cover, or yep, they were able to successfully move the entire way. I love it because it gives me this miniatures game feel. You might say, but Eddie, when they miniatures move, right, you still see the terrain, you know how many inches they move. Well, there is a particular game, and there are some, where you roll a dice to determine how many inches you get to move. So they might not get to move the whole distance, so they might not get to move to the cover they were looking for. How does that relate to this? It's same. I moved them, but because I botched their cover roll, that just means they weren't able to completely make it to cover. I love it, and it is frustrating, but I think, again, it adds that replayability, right? I can't have the map memorized. I don't know the best places to move for the scenario. That's why I was saying how some games, when you play a scenario, it feels like a puzzle. Because you know where the enemy is set up, you know where the attacker is set up, and based on the map that you have fought over many, many, many times, you know the path you should take. Or if that didn't work, you say, hey, let's play again. I'm going to try this other path. And then it becomes a puzzle and not so much a simulation of combat. So even though you have a free open map, you're going to have a different gameplay experience every time you play. And that's what I'm going to leave us with. Just some of the basic rules of like moving, shooting, your activation chart, what it takes to activate and move people. And I think what you've got is an outstanding game that anybody is going to enjoy. I really think that. Now, if it's too abstract for you, I think if you gave it a shot, you would thoroughly enjoy it. I have, mostly because some of these mechanics I've seen in other games, and it's nice to see how H&S Games and Jason Cruz there, they've pulled some of these elements together to make a good, cohesive system. So if you are interested, just keep an eye out for December when it goes live. And again, I think the cost was going to be about 15 bucks, but you get an amazing amount of game for that price, even with the cost of printing. So I printed these at home this time instead of going to the professional printer, so I saved a little bit of money. But the components still look good, even for print and play. So I don't think you can go wrong with this. And if I'm wrong, then, well, you're not out much, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. If you have questions, want to leave comments, go ahead. And then, you know, maybe Jason can watch this, leave comments, and answer questions that you have. But again, have a great night.